Yes. To do this rose, first you would need this. I use this normal Navigator photocopying paper, and the equipment I used was this big pen. It's just a normal pen, biro pen. I would normally make sure that I've got a few of these, because if your ink runs out in between, every pen's ink color is slightly different, and you don't want to be in the middle of your portrait not to be able to complete it. But for this, I only use one pen for this whole drawing. I didn't need more than that. And it took me roughly 9 hours to do it from beginning to end. So the other good idea is to take a few sheets of your photocopying paper to put underneath your work where you're going to start to shade. So this is what I done. I put a few sheets underneath. The other tip that you can always use is to use your fingernails just to make sure that you don't go over the line when you're shading upwards. I will show you'll be looking at that in the video how I've done that. Another very good tip for me is when you do shade, you make sure you've not got any oil on your hand or a cream, or your hand is sweating, because that will make your ink smudge, and you don't want that on your thing. And also I would use a paper, photocopying paper, to rest while you're coloring, so that if your hand does sweat or has any oil marks, it won't go on your work. So that's really important when you're doing large pieces, to make sure that you end up with a clean work. That's all the equipment we used. I am just going to show you how the whole shading, the whole rose is done through one little sketch. And if you can follow this, it's everything I've done. That is all you need to know. I would hold my fingernail there and make sure the edges are very dark. If I need to make this edge line dark like you would for the rose inner lines, you do that. That will not show up. You want to go and flick towards the middle. It's like feathering. You're making a gradient. You're not just letting the edges be dark. You're making sure the edges are the skinny end of it. So I am just going there. If you do one, let's say, very harsh line, the way to correct it is to do more lines next to it, just right next to it, and the other side, until that line disappears. That harsh line will finally go over it. It's like an ink that will just spread. It will disappear. So when you're happy with that, make sure the directions of your lines are correct according to the rose or the shape you're doing. Now that I've done the edge very dark, I'm spreading a bit more across, and you can see my gradient, that it's making that same pen, but when you do enough lines, it turns into a sheen. Every pen will have a slightly different color. Any line that you see is harsh, do more lines next to it, and you will see that line will slowly disappear and blend in as you would any other thing. You would not see a line. It should be very sheen and fine. Okay, when I've done this, I would turn my paper around, and when you're doing large pieces, I would also use one sheet of paper just to rest my hand on, to make sure I don't sweat or have any ink marks, and I would do the same on the other side. So I'm just making the same lines that I've done very quickly on the other side, making sure that near the line there's no white spaces here. If there's space, you just put little dots and then pull them out. You just do little dots right near there if you see any little thing, and then you just make sure that your lines are very straight according to the direction that you want. And always move your paper is the best advice I can give you, because it makes your life so much easier and your lines so clean and straight in the direction that you want them to go. When you've done it, layer it with more lines just to make sure there's no harsh lines left. And as you can see, the middle looks clean, and that can be a form of shading as well. But because I'm doing the rows, I would like my lines to join. So I'm just pushing these lines, starting from the darker point, pulling it up very lightly. I'm not going right to the end. I'm going as far as I can. And I'm just trying to shade across and graduate the lines to become another shade of graduation, making it lighter as it's going towards the middle. You can find out exactly wherever you want your highlight. You make sure that you do that bit dark, and where you want the highlight, you're going to go the lightest. So you decide exactly where you want. Now I'm going to turn the paper around, and I'm going to do the same thing on the other side. I'm going to make sure I clean my paper, my pen. By doing this, you make sure you haven't got any ink on your pen that is going to create the blotches in your fine lines and make it, it's going to really spoil the drawing. So now I'm going around the other side very, very lightly. And I'm going to make the lines run into each other. They're almost going to join, but because they're from the opposite side, it's going to be a very different effect. It's going to look very sheen. And right in the middle, you can just go over it very lightly, lightly shade. Lightly shade, you won't see any of the lines until all of it is just completely clear. That is how all of the shading is done in the rows. First of all, I've just made a sketch of the rows that I wanted to do, just the outline. Now I'm going to start to do the shading. So the shading I'm going to take from each of the lines of the rose petals where they join. I'm going to start from anywhere you can start. There is no starting or finishing point. I'm going to start from this one. So what I'm doing is I'm making it very dark towards the end, and I'm just feathering it towards the other side. So I'm making sure that the lines are graduated as I'm going along. And also the direction of the lines is really important. If you want a flower petal, you need to make sure that each of the lines is the right angle of your petal. It should go like these. I'm making a bit curved. It's also better to move your paper so that you make your life easier. When the paper is turned, it's easy to make your hand pivot in the right direction. So what I'm doing is I'm just taking it from the end of the line, making it very, very dark, going over it if I need to. So I'm just gonna color it very dark so that you can't see any white near the lines. It should look almost like a copy, like it's been printed. If it doesn't, you just add more lines. Okay, so now I'm carrying on. I'm going to use my nail as the thing to make sure I don't go over the line. That's another way to do it. Okay, so after I've got around here, I'm going to turn around my shade. Now when I turn it around, I'm going to shade the lines will almost meet, and this time the shading on the end will not be so dark. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go over the other end. So the main thing you have to look at is that the lines, they're almost like in the same angle as the ones above you. And the gap that you've got in between it, that naturally comes from it, that's going to be your highlight in between the petals. If you don't get a line right, just do the next one. It's almost like a paintbrush. Always use the same angle of the brush. Don't turn your pen around. Just leave it on one angle. So as you can see, we've got this highlight, and now if I look at my pattern, I can go like very slightly over, almost joining the lines. That will give it very lightly. So that will be almost, some lines are joining and some left straight. It's giving a highlight and it's giving shape to the petals. So I'm going to continue doing this one. Always don't be afraid to move your paper around or use a nail, just your fingernail, just so that you don't go over the line.